something inside you. It sounds so familiar. May I remind you? Why is it? Why is it? Come on and tell me. Go on, remind me. Why is it? Why is it? Afraid I'm not hearing it. Why is it? Why is it? Afraid I'm not hearing it. Little like about to chat and sit and fights for chilling and yeah, found myself sleeping in mountains and mountains in a river flowing down from me. Yeah, when I see it, I don't see it. Hi, hi, yeah, tell me already. Why is it? Why is it? When I see it, I don't see it. Hi, 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 hi. Why is it? Why is it?
Hello and welcome back to Place of Assembly. We have an exciting episode for you tonight, episode 6, almost at the halfway point of series 1. Thanks to everybody who's been watching, all the support and feedback. Tonight, we're going to be talking about something that just sort of happened by its standards. Miami Basel, aka Miami Art Week, kind of a famed institution or event, however you want to look at it. A period of time in Miami that has come to assume great importance to a variety of actors in the art, music, corporate, socialite, you name it, world. Kind of a fascinating cultural, socioeconomic, political, geographic thing. I've had the blessing and the curse of going the last 6 times in a row, and it's something that I swear I'm not going to do every year and always do, except for this year. This is my first time not going in 6 years. And we are joined today by 2 Miamians, 2 esteemed Miamians from the Miami art world. Andrew McLeese of Miami ICA, where he is Director of Digital Experience, and Melissa Wallen from the De La Cruz Collection, where she is Director. And Andrew and Melissa both get up to a number of other things, which they will tell you about. They're involved in the local DIY, open performance, inclusive kind of low-key street-level community. Andrew's been running a festival for 8 years called Look Alive Fest, and is involved with a space called 229. So we'll get into that too, but we're gonna jump off on Art Week and get into Art World, and then get into art and everything else. So Andrew and Melissa emerge from beyond the icon and say hello.
Hey, how's it going, Sam? Good to hear from you.
Good. I hope I'm not blowing up your spot, but Andrew and Melissa are also a magnificent couple, and an inspiring example of what love can do.
Sam, we miss you. We should be hanging out at a pool right now.
I know. This would be my extra day. Oh, wait a minute. Let me go full screen. For you guys, I'm going to enter full screen. Yeah, no, the last time I was down there, we had that amazing night at that incredible restaurant. What do you remember what I'm talking about? We had to wait. Vietnamese food.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was Moshi Moshi. Yeah, that's like the late night spot that they have great sushi.
Unbelievable. I think I was terribly exhausted and passed out in your car on the way home. But, I had solid reason to be exhausted. And exhaustion is a good segue into Miami Art Week. So what happened down there this year, guys? Like, I've heard various accounts, but I'm curious from Miamians' perspective, like, how did this situation that we face as a globe impact Art Week?
Well, I mean, for one thing, I think we're getting a little bit of an echo.
Happens
Yeah,
sometimes.
I mean, just I mean, what you mentioned, Sam, is absolutely true. During this time of Art Week, there's always this intersection of basically the entire world descending upon the city. So it's incredibly exciting for the community. And this year, we saw a lot of familiar faces. I mean, it was wonderful to be able to be open to the public and to actually share art with the public because, of course, with COVID, the Daily Cruise Collection, we've been open since September, but for many institutions, we've all been closed. So having the opportunity to share the collection with the people who are able to make it down here was really great and really manageable. And we were able to have some fantastic conversations with some familiar, friendly faces. But it's absolutely a different experience than what we've seen in the past. I mean, usually we'll see thousands of people walk through the space, and this year maybe 100. So that's
Yeah.
that's a huge difference for us.
Yeah, and I think from the perspective of people working behind the counter, arts admin and people working visitor services and whatnot, a little bit of a much needed respite from the craziness of the art world. Otherwise, I mean, Melissa's mentioning thousands, versus the hundreds that we saw this year, and it's a reality that we both had to kind of reconcile from the administrative perspective as we count heads and make sure that we want to we want to reach certain numbers, and also this desire to sort of just completely cancel Basel this year and just move on with our lives, and plan for 2021.
Yeah. The one thing that I can say though is that with Basel, of course, it comes with a lot of activity and sometimes a lot of noise. So the one silver lining that I can say is that it seems as though the local community has been doing a lot of really fantastic shows and kind of coming together to keep the show going. Obviously, we miss Basel. It's a moment where we get to invite all of our friends from all over the world and all over the country. And Sam, you've come down for Lookalike Fest, so it's really an important time where we can cross pollinate and create new opportunities for performances
Yeah.
and installations and just being able to see what everybody's up to
Yeah.
here in Miami is always incredible. So that was absolutely missed. But it was a year that it was a little slower.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about how success of Art Basel was sort of based, or is entirely based on virtual sales and how many people were kind of engaging on their virtual platforms. And it was, by comparison, a much more toned down, less sort of, I guess, free spirited, libertine sort of like approach to
Electric.
yeah, it was a much different experience this year.
No parties,
Yeah, yeah, we had like the specter of COVID waiting behind every corner. It was something. I mean, it didn't stop some people from partying, because some people the urge to party is just greater than the urge to survive, I suppose. So we had a little bit of that.
But for us, it's of course we want to be able to share the collections. For me, Rose and Carlos, it was super important that we were able to continue to share the collection. So
Yeah.
we had to be as responsible as possible in the way that we did that. And so the lower numbers is better because then we can do it safely.
Yeah, and reclaiming the public's trust too has been a top priority, I think, of most arts museums. We're sort of balancing that sort of fine line between like how do we reach our numbers and how do we how do we also sort of like keep our staff and visitors safe. So it's been a fine line, it's been a fragile dance, but we finally sort of like got past Art Week, so we can start thinking about it a little bit more clearly now.
How much travel from out of town was there just in general, like artists, gallerists, visitors just to see stuff? Like, was there any of that, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were both in the design district, and there was a couple of galleries that had come down. I know there was
Ramekin was there.
Ramekin, there was
Salon
Daesh.
94.
Yeah, there was Levy Gorvey. So, there was quite a few galleries within the district and they sent a few representatives. And then there were a few people who, they come down to Miami every year. And so there's no birds and I've heard of several people coming from New York and LA and they're renting a place in Miami for several months. So
Yeah, so they'll
they've
be
already
there
been
indefinitely.
quarantining in Florida and now there's Art Week.
Yeah.
So, okay, so the fairs themselves, the art fairs themselves, and we should actually get into just talking about what Art Week is because it's something that even as a person who was programming for it, it took me a while to kind of figure out what it really is, right? But let's get to that in a second. The fairs, the art fairs themselves, were they all virtual?
For the most part, with the exception of Design Miami. So Design Miami, located in the design district, and they did open with limited capacity, and they seem to be really stringent about their protocols. So it seems like they did a pretty good job. But all of the other art fairs, I think for a lot of them, of course, these art fairs, there's a huge investment when they come down, and also for the galleries. I mean, they have to ship work and bring in the whole shebang when they come down to Miami. So for them, I know that it's also weighing all of these different considerations when it comes to health and transportation and
Is
the
Design
whole, like,
Miami the
so yeah, Design Miami happened. None of the other art fairs really took place.
But is Design Miami the same organization? Maybe you don't know much about these people, but I'm pretty sure Design Miami also did Miami Project, and there was like a art fair devoted to drawing that they did. I'm pretty sure that's the same company. They're like this giant mega art fair company that has like a bunch of different fairs, and they go all. Anyways, I worked for those people one year. So okay. So the art fairs themselves like weren't part of it for all intents and purposes. I mean.
Right.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So it was like the local. So basically, there was like an acknowledgement of Art Week by the local arts institutions, whereby everybody did concerted programming meant to bring in a safe amount of the public, and then there were a handful of galleries that came down and maybe just commandeered a space somewhere, and that was Art Week this year.
Right.
Yeah, that
And
sounds
then-
about right.
And then, of course, we have our local galleries and we have the artists that have been working to put together shows. So there's also things that have been happening. There was a small exhibition that was done by several different artists. I think Jean was actually curated.
Right, the AIM Biennial.
The AIM Biennial. And then for us, because we had been in quarantine, we had also this moment to reflect, like a lot of people have been reflecting on kind of the past and Miami and how our city has grown. So we happen to also have a project by George Sanchez Calderon, who is a local Miami artist, also lived in Spain. But in 2001, the first year that Art Basel was coming to town, it was canceled because of September 11th. And George had put together this incredible project where he had recreated the Villa Savoia by Corbusier underneath our I-395. So in about 3 days, he built this structure under the overpass, and it stayed up for 3 years. So he went through his archives and with Rosa and Rosa de la Cruz. For those that don't know, Rosa and Carlos de la Cruz are the private collectors that own the de la Cruz collection that also were really important to Art Basel. Even first coming down to Miami, they were the first ones to really start opening their home to the public, which at the time was completely radical, and today is still kind of this radical act of generosity with our space that we open to the public completely free of charge. But Rosa spent time with George, and they went through the files, and now we have a light box in the space that reflects on that project that is really this kind of strange little piece of Miami history. And now they're actually tearing down that highway, so it's very cool to be able to look back.
Huh, that is cool. I mean, that gets into a thing that we should spend some time on during this talk. But I want to get to just what is Art Week first. But Miami Art Week is a time when really improbable, bizarre things can happen. You know, like
Yeah.
you can just get things going on that that kind of just like accumulate through a series of necessities of a given institution or like a confluence of institutions that become something that you never would have thought of. And that is one of the really astonishing and amazing things about that period of time. So we should vibe out on that. But let's like tell folks what Art Week Miami is. And also, you know, Basil, I for example, I didn't know that the first time Basil came to Miami was in 2001. So
it was canceled. It was
canceled,
2002 is when they technically came, and it was because of September 11th.
Right. I wasn't sure if you meant that the piece was canceled or the whole thing was canceled. So yeah, I actually didn't realize that it was only had been going on for 18 years. That I kind of in my mind I think assumed that it had been going on for longer. But yeah, so just give like a synopsis of what Art Week is, and then I'll add my angle to it. I'll add the outside perspective.
Synopsis of what Art Week is. Okay, so you have Art Basel, which originated in Basel, Switzerland, and then came to Miami, was originally supposed to be here in 2001, ended up starting in 2002, but it's kind of this premier art fair, which then has snowballed because then you get all of these other satellite art fairs that have kind of developed around it. So then you have Scope, you've got Aqua, you've got Untitled. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on and on.
How
And
many
of course-
fairs would you say there are total?
Sorry?
How many fairs would you say there are total?
Probably like 15.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I'm sorry, I just wanted to give the breadth.
Yeah.
But go on,
Yeah, the
sorry.
full scope of things. for
Yeah,
sure.
to understand just the impact on the city, it's the city becomes gridlocked during
yeah,
this week
for sure.
typically. So even just being able to drive through the city or find parking is like a very small miracle. But yeah, so it's a moment where then there's such an investment within the city and there's such an energy within the city that you're right. There's these moments where you have these projects that otherwise might not be possible. Performances and installations and works that are ephemeral that will pop up for a week and then disappear.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think it's also sort of Miami's art scene responding to an opportunity that was brought in was ushered through the sort of political and economic influence of Basel. So once that sort of took root in South Florida, you know, we had this opportunity to sort of to expand outward and also to just sort of reflect inward in the sense that, like, you know, we had a lot of artists who wanted to kind of create their own thing. So I think Miami Art Week is really just a response to the outsider art fairs coming in and the satellite fairs kind of generating this energy that's able to sort of like be harnessed and turned into something that's uniquely Miami. So that happens in, you know, myriad ways. It could be like Melissa was talking about, like performances and you know, different art one-offs, limited engagement opportunities, that kind of thing.
Right. So,
Right.
Just to put the lens on this a little bit more, because I'm kind of assuming that nobody knows about this, although I'm sure a lot of people know about it. But you know, who knows what anyone knows? So we're just going to be comprehensive, right? So an art fair. It's funny because when you just say art fair, it just sounds like it's like a craft fair or something. You know what I mean? but it's like it's like something you would go to at like your kid's school or something. But like an art fair is an institution that sells booth space to galleries who come to sell their work. I mean, in certain instances, perhaps galleries are invited free of charge or what have you. But the basic premise is an institution commandeers a very large location and gallery, and then that location is divided up into relatively small booths that are then curated and inhabited by galleries who come to the fairs with the hopes to sell work on behalf of their artists, right? This is what an art fair is. And I mean, in my experience, art fairs, I would say on a good day, or if you're at any successful art fair at prime time, there's anywhere from 500 to 2,000 people there, something like that. Like Scope is pretty huge. You know, Nada is pretty huge. I'd say like when Nada was at the Deauville when it was like peak, I mean there had to be 2,000 people there. I feel like. Anyways, so there's so there's 15 or 16 of these things at any given time. There's 500 to 2,000 at any one people at any one of them, and basically every one of these fairs is probably displaying the work of anywhere from like 30 to 100 galleries, something like this. Would you say that's right? Are those numbers?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah.
About right?
Yeah.
So all told, you've got like 1,000 galleries, probably. So okay, so no, but this is really interesting to just actually like unpack what's going on. You've got like 1,000 galleries, probably 5,000 artists at least, and that's just from the fairs. Do you know what I mean? And then you've got the 16 fairs, and then and so then this phenomena becomes this like, I mean, this is a statement and a question.
It's like a pressure cooker.
Yeah, it becomes like a pressure cooker. This is a question in the form of a statement. This phenomena becomes like this thing with this kind of magnetic property that like then draws all kinds of other shit down to Miami, right? I mean, in my experience. So what is that other shit?
Well, there's things like Look Alive Fest. I think Andrew can maybe talk a little bit about Look Alive Fest and what he gets himself into.
Yeah.
Typically during this week, since there's so much energy and
so really quickly,
excitement.
before we get into that and what draws people to Miami Art Week, I think it's also worth noting that I think one of the most peculiar things about Art Week, or at least like the major art fairs, specifically the Art Basel over at the Convention Center, is that we're seeing blue chip art entirely removed from any sort of like institutional or art historical context. And this is really something that like people who haven't visited Miami or have done the tour should know about it. It's basically, I mean, it's a platform for the exchange of art as commerce, right? I mean, it is collectors from all over the world, billionaires, millionaires, everybody, even people who are attending smaller scale festivals are purchasing artworks, in the hopes of being able to build a collection or solidify some sort of financial investment in art or whatnot. Right. So it's a peculiar experience wandering the hallways of some place like Art Basel, where you might be surrounded by thousands of people who are looking at art that is entirely removed from the context to which it is most impactful. And yet this is still sort of like this central moment, right? What draws people from all over the world, and even Miami. This is what a lot of Miamians' relationship to art is in the city.
And I think that that's a great point that Andrew brings up. And it also kind of brings you back to the context of like an ICA or the De La Cruz collection where I work, is that Miami has also these institutions that have been developing over the years. And the De La Cruz collection has been open for about the last 10 years now. It was opened in 2009. But what makes Miami so unique is that you have these private collections. You have the De La Cruz collection, you have the Rubels, you have the Margulies collection, you have, now ICA is our next door neighbor. They're next door, so carpooling is very easy. So you have these great institutions now that are also putting into context what's happening in the contemporary art world.
Yeah.
For the Miami locals, so that they don't have just that 1 week where they get to see great art.
Right. So let's talk about the outsider energy. There is something very magnetic about there being an influx of so much energy and attention and money, that it brings people from all over the country to South Florida. And I've always seen this as sort of like an opportunity for like the Miami arts community to sort of like, dig in, not only represent themselves as something wholly unique to the international arts ecosystem, but also like an opportunity to sort of learn from the broader international community as well. There's been a whole lot of, a lot of, like in the past, especially, a lot of really great events that are stewarded by major international art galleries. And a lot of times, I mean, we've had, uh, I don't even remember. I mean, that's the other thing. These things tend to be lost weekends for the art world, like we sort of like drift in and out of this sort of like, um, you know, very sort of dreamlike, you know,
Yes, I
art
know. I know. Yeah, yeah.
art. But yeah, um, but for the most part, yeah, there's a fascination with what happens down here too. I mean, most people hear Miami and they think swamps. So to hear that there's, the Miami art community is inviting all this international talent down here, or by way of having a major institution um, invested in it, you know, we get the freaks hanging out with the champagne karting set, and that tends to produce some very interesting
results.
results. We also have our fair share of sort of like, corporate hangers on, and we appreciate it. I mean, it's more money for the city. It's obviously empowering creatives, both local and international, to sort of like have a presence here. But I think some of the more interesting stuff tends to be, the more, you got to go out and find it kind of stuff. And that's only being done by people who are participating locally on the ground. So that's our contribution. We make it weird,
Right.
like everyone brings the money, but we make it weird.
Let me jump in there, because I mean, I want to make something clear just from the jump in this conversation. And I mean, by the way, like, we're going to get through this Miami Art Week thing, and we're going to talk about De La Cruz and ICA and the other stuff that you do and your initiatives and what. This is just kind of like the elephant in the room because Art Week just happened. But I think Art Week is incredible, and every time, like when I'm on the plane home, I'm like, I'm never doing that again. And then I always go back and do it again. And I think it's incredible. And I think it's incredible for a variety of reasons. One is that there is a very high concentration of really great work being presented by a variety of institutions, and across all the fairs. It's not just the big fairs. It's like, it's at every scale of the thing. There really are people putting some of their best feet forward. You know what I mean? From the pop-ups to the minor fairs to the fairs to Basel to the museums, it's like, and to just, whatever, people doing shit on the street. It's like, it really is pretty densely populated with quality work, right? Two, there's this thing that happens, I guess, like, there's kind of reason 2, and there's not really a reason 3. Reason 3 is just sort of like 2A. But there's this thing that happens because the other side of that is that you have this event that attracts this incredible amount of money to Miami, because this is where people go to shop for art in America, right? Like this and Frieze Week, basically, unless you're buying direct from galleries, right? This then magnetizes all of this corporate energy and corporate interest, and then everybody's trying to catch a look, you know what I mean? This was a big part of my work when I was down there, just kind of fielding these requests and whatnot. And under ordinary circumstances, if you're at an event and there's some corporate intervention happening, it feels a bit vulgar or tacky, or just, or maybe it depends on the event, right? It depends on the event. It may feel totally appropriate at a certain kind of event, but in certain settings, it's like, oh man, did we really need to do all this? Especially if there's a lot of visual branding and stuff. But like the corporate intervention or the corporate like interloping that happens at Miami Art Week is happening at such like a scale and such a speed and from so many directions that it just becomes this like composite aesthetic that. Do
Yeah.
you understand what I'm saying? It's like
Yep.
completely.
It just goes with the neon. It's Miami Beach.
Yeah.
Right.
It's,
It's but it's like
Right, where
amazing because it's
it's
like
almost
we're
the
become-
flashy, you
it's,
know?
it's almost transcended its
right.
tackiness
It's like
from its own sort of
yeah. It's like this
experiential art.
actual like
Yeah.
capitalism itself. It's like the end of Stranger Things where you like see the monster. Do you know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
like you know
Yeah,
what
you've
I'm
waited
saying?
all episode to see the monster, and here it is.
Right. It's like the
You
end of
get a week of it.
Ghostbusters.
It's
or something.
you. You're the
Yeah,
monster.
right. It's like if you get every corporation together in one place, you see capitalism. Do you know what I, like?
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's like, there is. This is point 2A. There is something vulgar about it, but like I personally like that because I feel I find it suspicious when something is presented in a way that hides all of its dark qualities. Do you understand
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Like when, and I mean, to be honest, like that's something about museums that I always feel it's like a little antiseptic. Do you know what I mean? Like, like I love museums too. It's a mixed thing, but it's like Miami Art Week. It's all out there. Do you know what I mean? Like you're on your way to, you know, some deep art event that you're really looking forward to, and you know, there's like a palimpsest of corporate installations like intersecting and intertwining in the lobby that become this like other thing, and it's very like aggressive, but it's almost like it has like a Times Square effect. It's like it's like so much that it's kind of beautiful, but it's also kind of there's something, it's sublime. It's kind of beautiful, and there's something that's absolutely like terror inducing. Do you know what I mean? But it's also, but then there's also this amazing work happening. You know, it's really a three-dimensional experience, man. And it's like totally visceral, and I really value it. Do you know what I mean?
It's like some Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Right, no,
It's by
exactly.
the end of it all, there's like an elegant decay to all the corporatist sort of like, you know, everything. And yeah, I'm seeing like all the events are sort of all lined up and slowly crumbling. It's it's quite a scene.
No, it's so wild. Yeah. But anyways, I wanted to bring that aspect of it alive a little bit. And that also I have to say, because that may be more, because I work on the fringes of it. Do you know what I mean? Like you guys are in the office, like in the museum, you're like doing the good work and making the incredible art event happen. I'm making the after party happen. Do you know what I'm saying? So I'm like if
That's also doing the good work, Sam.
Oh, for
Oh,
sure.
well, no, thank you. But I am dealing with those cutty elements. It's like, you know, Adidas has this artist and they want blah, blah, blah. And you have to try to make it happen. Do you know what I mean? So like, that is kind of more my perspective on it. But, so I also wanted to bring that alive. But, Art Week, totally crazy. I have to say, what you're describing, this like super intimate, homey Art Week, sounds beautiful and like really restful and well deserved.
We didn't know how much we needed it till it happened. You know what I mean?
Well, and also, you know, we had visitors come in and say that they came down to Miami, they were here last Basel, and man, it's so nice to be able to really reflect on the work. You know, that was another part where it wasn't busy. You didn't have that whipped up energy, and for some people it was really nice to just be able to look.
Right. And by virtue of past Basels sort of having that sort of like corporatist sheen to it, right, the corporatist aesthetic, you know, a lot of people's engagement with the city was exactly that, you know, so it was
Right.
refreshing, especially the people who were sort of having this desire to leave wherever they were to come down here. That was exactly the other side of Miami that they experienced. I mean, there were plenty of people who were doing like the Libby Mugabe, you know,
Right.
thing, you know, and partying and whatnot, despite living through a pandemic. But I mean, you also had people who were sort of treated to a side of Miami that they might not have ordinarily had access to had they intended to, you know, treat the city as sort of like just, you know, 1 week's vacation to come down and purchase art, as is most people's experience during Art Week, you know, who are visiting from out of town. And then, you know, I want to touch on this one thing that you were talking about, you know, just art and money. I mean, you know, strange bedfellows, sure, but I mean, art and commerce are inextricably entwined, you know, especially working at a museum we've had some corporate partners that have allowed us to do some programming that we would have never been able to otherwise do, especially since, you know, the service that we offer to the community is free and open access, you know, in an attempt to sort of improve, you know, the general public's visual literacy, you know, and understand how sort of like contemporary art better informs the way they see the world or understand the world around them. So, man, that money, let me tell you, like that's allowed us to do our first Fridays programming. You know, we have an innovation partnership with Minnie. Thank you, Minnie. You know, like that kind of thing. So, so yeah, there's a whole lot more of that during Art Basel Miami Art Week, and you know, part of us are, you know, there's one side of us that you know, we grew up in a very sort of like punk DIY mentality of being like, yeah, we don't want to have any of that. As a matter of fact, like that is repulsive to us. But like, there's also that other side of us that are like, well, without the contributions of like corporations, we might not otherwise be able to like keep the lights on. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. We see it happen at the museum institutional level. It's the same way across the board for a lot of different cultural organizations, and even some, you know, private, and even some individuals are privately funded by you know, big money.
But I'm very privileged to not have that.
Yeah,
because you're coming from a totally.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really interesting because, and we're gonna tease this out because the institutions that you guys work for operate along lines of very different models. Because
Very different.
you're in this lane that's almost this like early 20th century like family. Do you know what I mean? Like the Carnegies, right? It's like De La Cruz collection. It's like their collection, their home, their vision, and that's like its own. It's like in a way, it's kind of like an archaic form of philanthropy. That still, it's not that it doesn't exist in America. Do you know what I mean? Of course, it exists at your institution, but like corporate sponsorship has become a much more dominant trajectory of fundraising.
Absolutely.
In recent years, whereas you know, family foundations and families just, you know, participating in philanthropy used to be, you know, certainly more prominent a form of philanthropy than corporate sponsorship, right? So we have kind of like two sides of a coin. But Melissa, we're gonna go. Okay, this is how I'm gonna make a little roadmap. We're gonna go through this. We're gonna go
Please
through this.
control this journey.
Yeah. We're gonna go through this like punk rock corporate thing that Andrew was talking about, because I want to address that, and then into De La Cruz somehow. That's not much of a map. When if somebody were giving you directions and then they were like, and then somehow that wouldn't be
We're
very.
gonna take a sharp left.
Yeah, that wouldn't inspire confidence. But anyways, believe. You have to have faith, not confidence. Okay, so but wait a minute. Okay, but I want to hit this punk rock corporate shit. Because I run this club Hollow in New York, which is, you know, it's not formally like a DIY club because it's completely legal. We have all of our licenses. We're just you know, we're just a bar and a venue doing business, but it has a strong connection to that legacy, and it kind of reads as that aesthetically. And my feeling in dealing with that, because I like rigorously kept corporate sponsorship out of my venues for years. And at a certain point, I was like, man, no one cares about this, even punks. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I had your experience when I was a kid. If you took money from a soft drink, that'd be a death sentence on the scene, man. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like literally people would stop talking to you. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If on the DC scene in the 90s, if I was like, hey guys, Mountain Dew gave me all this money for that'd be it. I would lose every one of my friends permanently. Do you understand what I'm saying? And now it's like, if you tell them that a soft drink is backing your stuff, it's like, high five, sick. It's like the best possible news, right? Do you understand what I'm saying? And it's like, so that's kind of to say that like you went through this journey personally, where you had this kind of feeling of like, oh, that's repugnant, to actually embracing this in some way because it facilitates the propagation of this culture. But then also the entire cultural sphere went through this journey, even for people who are presently as old as you were then. People don't have that like judgment looking down on taking that money anymore, because really every level of cultural production is kind of banking on that money being there at this point.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, that's the unfortunate truth. I was listening to one of the earlier episodes that you were hosting, and I think this was also touched on at some point about. Uh, y- I mean, it's exactly that. It's we. There's so much gross inequality that we're in a situation where, like, yeah, it's we're forced to, and also it's become at some point sort of like culturally acceptable to accept that money. I mean, there's always going to be that.
Necessary.
It is necessary to to drive cultural production.
And to
Um,
pay your artists.
I'm of the romantic sort of side of things
Disposition.
where and I think that sort of drove me to do what I did for as long as I did. Um, but at some point, it's also it's worth acknowledging that this is sort of like that apparatus that sort of like allows these sort of ideas to flourish in the first place. And it's really that's how artists pay the bills, right? I mean,
Absolutely. 100%.
so we're sort of like reconciling with what it means to sort of like be, open arms accepting cash from who would otherwise have condemned as sort of like being the man giving us money and whatnot. So,
Word. Well, I could riff on this like all night, but I think what the opportunity that we have here is to hear about another model, and then maybe we'll like somehow they'll all meet in the middle. But it's because I mean trust when it comes to like talking about corporate like weaving.
That could be a whole other talk.
Oh,
I
for
mean,
sure.
dude, it's like you don't want to even get me started. But anyways, I mean, to make a long story short though, it's like that train has left the station, and I'm not
Mhm.
mad at reality, and I'm just working with what is in fact the case, right? The world is that which is the case. Wittgenstein.
Right.
Okay, but De La Cruz, totally different bag, doing things in a totally different way. So you kind of touched on it a few times, but like I wanted to fully make space to hear about that because it's super interesting. So like, give us the like, just tell us about that. Tell us about De La Cruz.
Yeah, so I just for these incredible collectors that they believe in their collection and they believe in their community and they live in Miami, and so they want to support their community through education. And so every dollar that's involved with the De La Cruz collection is directly out of their pockets. So we don't have any government assistance. The only sponsors that we work with is the Knight Foundation for our scholarship funds, because annually we actually send students abroad to Europe, students that graduate from New World School of the Arts for about 2 weeks, just so they can put everything that they learned into context. And then we also send students from Design and Architecture Senior High School, which is right down the street from us. It's an incredible school with wildly talented kids. They're like super geniuses. We send them to SVA and to Parsons in New York.
We've lost them for one moment, but they will be right back. Let's see here. Come on, you can.
They
do
made
this.
it happen. So we're very fortunate in that.
Melissa, I lost you for about 15 seconds because the where I am, it jumped from one Wi-Fi signal to the other. Can you go from can you go from sending them to Europe to they made it happen? I missed it.
Yeah.
Can we just,
Essentially, yeah. So we
fix this
send
in post?
college students from New World School of the Arts that graduate with their BFA. We send them abroad. So actually, one year we went to China, and that was incredible too. But this is completely paid for by Rosa and Carlos in partnership with the Knight Foundation and different community members. And then we send Design and Architecture Senior High School students. We send them to pre-college programs at SVA and Parsons, as well as we have a scholarship program through a design competition we do every year. So everything that happens in the collection, all of our programming is completely free. Our lectures, artist-led workshops. The last summer that we were able to actually have our workshops in 2019, we actually taught kids how to code, to 3D print. They had their own exhibition. Amazing. So very different model in that I work with this couple that they love contemporary art. They live in Miami and they just wanted to make it happen, so they did.
That is amazing. So I two things. I want to talk more about community because I know that's like a hot button issue in Miami about like the art world and community, and that pertains also to Art Week. And then I really, if you know, I really want you to tell me what you can about Rosa and Carlos. But let's hit the community thing first. Can you tell me more about your community programs and like the type of outreach you do to, and who you're bringing in there and how that works? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with New School of the Arts and we work with Design and Architecture Senior High School. And so the teachers really determine who goes on these trips. We're not involved with selecting students. We help facilitate the programs. So we put together curated itineraries and basically just make sure they get on the plane and they get to where they need to go. They even give sheets, towels, luggage to the students because they don't want the kids to feel like they don't have the same thing as, you know, maybe the more affluent New York kid who gets to go to the New York or gets to go to SVA May. So they want the kids to feel really good and ready to go. Yeah.
So the program specifically targets undercapitalized youth communities. Is that the case, or?
Well, I mean, it really targets kids that have potential and that their teachers have selected. So, yeah, we're not part of that selection process, but yeah, for the most part, Miami, it's a lot of glitz, but what people don't realize is that there's a lot of need in this city, and that a lot of times access is not something that our students have. So it's unlike New York where maybe, you know, you have the Met and the Met's open and free on a particular day. In Miami, you don't have that.
Yeah.
So if you're from a family who's, you know, just maybe immigrated to the United States, you don't have the means to get on a plane with brand new luggage to go to a pre-college program.
Yeah.
So,
And I just want to riff on access too for a second in that, you know, New York City is the type of place where, you know, where access to cultural institutions is almost as dense as it is like bars in Chicago, you know? You could really just sort of like walk down the street and be someplace new. In Miami, it's, you know, we only have a couple contemporary art museums or museums, cultural institutions or whatnot that kind of like support the exchange of ideas and, you know, and whatnot on that level. But the other thing I think worth noting is that we're both free, the De La Cruz collection and ICA Miami. So this idea of access goes both ways. We're thinking about it from a cultural perspective, having access to those artifacts or ideas, or like even access to like experts who can be able to like talk about it or whatever.
yeah.
But also in that all of our public programs, you know, admission to the museum, admission to the collection, that's free. And that is as a result of individual philanthropy. We have a board too, full of people who, you know, keep the doors open, the lights on, the same way that corporations help us, you know, bring some more innovative arts to the museum. So, I mean, it's pretty much the same way with lots of museums, but in the big difference is that our mission is to you know, offer free and open access to, you know, the most innovative art of our time.
Yeah, I mean, we had a ceremony with students at the collection, and one of the kids told us before he left for New York that he had never crossed North Miami. He'd never been to the space before because he had just kind of stayed in his neighborhood. And he ended up getting a scholarship to Central St. Martin's in Paris for full ride. So you have these brilliant kids that sometimes it just takes being able to get on the plane and having that confidence for them to understand that, hey, I can do this. I can move forward. I can expand my horizons.
Right.
And it makes it better for Miami
And
because
that
we have
starts with
an
turning the
engaged,
lights on.
yeah, and it starts with turning the lights on, exactly.
Yeah, that brings up two things for me. Last week on the show, actually, I had light
Excuse me, in
bulb.
London. Excuse me, no.
Last week on the show, I had light bulb from the Era Footwork crew in Chicago. You know, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but you know, DJ Rashad, DJ Spin, so on. Footwork
Yeah.
is like a dance form that's local to Chicago, specifically local to undercapitalized neighborhoods historically in Chicago. It's like a street dance form, and they're working with a gentleman named Wills Glassbeagle, and they've really built up this practice that they have with the Era Footwork crew, where they've found inroads into the fine art and dance worlds, and they've done like ICA Chicago takeover. No, MCA Chicago takeover, PS1, so on, and they've been in these kind of fine art contexts and won some really large, intense competitive grants in the dance world. And I led this conversation with them about that was kind of about doing that quote unquote out of context, and it was really interesting because the light bulb, who's I believe from West Side, and if I'm making a mistake, forgive me, felt very strongly, had very strong feelings about thinking of a museum as being out of context, because his point was like, I produced the context, which was it's really an electrifying conversation, and I encourage you to watch it. And then the other thing that reminds me of is when I presented Denzel Curry twice in Miami, maybe it was 3 years ago or 4 years ago.
I remember that.
He told me that it was a really big deal for him and his community that he got to do this, and that being invited and brought into that setting was a really meaningful invitation for him, and he crushed it. I mean, it was unbelievable. But something I wanted to ask in terms of, I mean, it's absolutely laudable and amazing that both of your institutions are free, and you know, eliminating that barrier to access is of course extremely important. How is that functioning in practice, in the sense of what is your perception around how many people are coming from where in the city as a function of it being free? Like, how does it being free make going to the art museum actionable for diverse communities throughout Miami? Is that working, or does something else need to be done, or what's going on with that?
Yeah, I would say that it is working. And for us too, something else that's really important for us is that every single person that walks into the museum has a docent with them. So we don't want to exist as a white box with work on the wall that is completely abstract and maybe so foreign in its concepts that people coming from wherever within the city that might not have been exposed to like the long lineage of contemporary art, we want to make sure that people can walk away with something. So we always have somebody there to have a conversation. So it's not so foreign, or it's like speaking Russian.
Right. And I think, you know, both of our institutions are committed to improving visual literacy, and the De La Cruz collection does it that way, and we're a little bit different. And so, you know, if I'm understanding you correctly, you want to understand how we're sort of like removing those barriers and being able to connect with our communities at large.
Well, or let me just tune that up a little bit. I think I understand at least one way in which you're removing the barriers, which is by making them free, which is super important. I'm from DC. All the museums are free, which is incredible, you know?
Yeah.
And there's like 120 plus museums in DC. It's a really actually remarkable thing about the city. Otherwise a weird, funky little town. But you know, in New York, the MoMA's $20, $25 or something. It's offensive. You know what I mean? So that's incredible. So I understand at least one way in which you are eliminating a barrier, and I'm wondering, is that working? Like, do you feel that it being free succeeds at causing people to travel to your museum and attend?
Yeah, we've absolutely had more people come in because there was no admission fee. People are more likely to float in and kind of their curiosity, once it's kind of perks up a little bit, knowing that they can just access the space, I think does help.
So I have a little bit more of a complicated answer to that, because we spent a lot of time, researching where our audiences are coming from, and thought pretty deeply about how, what it means to be somebody who's visiting a space that might otherwise be perceived as, a place that is,
Inaccessible.
reserved for the elite, right? Or is, some sort of like agent of change, like in a very negative way, something that's destroying community. We're not exactly sort of like, so we thought pretty deeply about this, and one way that we have approached this problem has been through the diversity of our programming. It's not enough to just hang art on the wall and give free admission and assume that people are going to show up. People have to be able to see themselves, like in the programming, in the art. Representation matters. We need to make sure that the diversity of our programming and our is reflective of the community's interests. So, and I think one way we managed to articulate that is especially in performance. So one of my colleagues, Victor Pinchota, and I ran 229, which was a DIY space that it was largely our mission to be able to do exactly that, like connect with the community, but also sort of like foster the exchange of ideas and be able to sort of like mobilize like the arts community at large. We take a lot of that same sort of like ethic and we apply it to programming at ICA, in the sense that like a lot of our sort of community programs, like our First Fridays programs, involves, local poets, local musicians, local everybody. We make sure that like, people who feel otherwise excluded by the sort of codified world of contemporary art have a place at the table and are able to sort of like engage in a place that is specifically for cultural expression. So we, the answer to the question of us being free and open is, that's great and all, but it means nothing if it's not reaching beyond what we could ordinarily access, like, high net worth individuals, people from Brickell, people from wherever. It wouldn't be doing us any favors to only be marketing to them. We need to make sure that we're producing, this inclusive, excellent, dynamic, like electric space by the strength of our programming. And that applies to the artists that we're showing, to the artists that we're collecting, to the stories that we're telling through our digital platforms, and even just like the programming. Again, I go back to First Fridays as being a great example of like, a very diverse, like excellent dynamic presentation of like, something that you might see at Hollow or something that you might see at 229. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
I have a deep cut follow-up question to that. So we're gonna scuba dive on this a little bit.
Yeah.
Something that is true about the art world is that it embodies an enormous amount of wealth, right?
Yeah.
Object-based artwork is worth a lot of money if it's collected and sold by galleries and so forth, right? So a lot of the capital that the art world embodies is embodied in the form of object-based work. So this is a way in which, because we're definitely living through a paradigm shift in the cultural sphere in our country. There's recent social and political movements that I'm sure you're aware of that, they're making, things need to change. Things are changing. A lot of people are following suit. Everybody I know in the cultural sphere is picking up what's being put down. And the art world finds itself in kind of an interesting pickle, to use a technical term. Just kidding. Uh, because so much of its value has to do with works of art made by dead white male artists, right? I mean,
Right.
this is a fact, right? So how do you pivot? And I think that performance is the answer that's sort of like that's coming from a lot of institutions. I see. And I have kind of a funny relationship to that in New York City because I see a lot of the bigger institutions booking performance programs that tend to feature artists that clubs like mine were presenting a lot like 9 to 18 months prior. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
I see that too.
Like I have like I'm not gonna blast anybody by name, but I have a joke that's like, fill in the blank institution presents the coolest shit from 9 months ago. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying that about ICA Miami, but like, but that is like, it is a thing in the art world, and I think it's a cool thing. I mean, I'm for any artist getting paid. Do you know what I mean? Like, if somebody's getting a check and it's a good look for them and it's kind of raising their stock as an artist, big ups to that person, and big ups to the museums for taking the initiative to create a more diverse program. I'm interested in what you said about how it informs the work that you collect, because as much as that is true, in order for the art world to actually shift, to make a change within the value that it embodies, the equity that constitutes it would have to be populated by a growing number of POC and historically undercapitalized and otherized communities, and that ties into what you said about it informs the work that you collect. So I'm interested in hearing more about that, and also just your thoughts about that pickle I mentioned of like, how do you just pivot? You guys are on this like aircraft carrier. You know what I mean? You can't just turn. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, so how do you tackle that as directors?
Well, to the credit of our acquisitions committee and our artistic director, Alex Gartenfeld, we've made a pledge to donate, or a pledge to allocate 75% of our collecting budget to communities of color. So BIPOC, Indigenous, LGBTQ. We actually have one of the first affinity programs in the country called the Culture Club, which is dedicated to acquiring, like-minded or like artists. So I think what it really means is that, I've always been of the persuasion that like there are two people in this world, or there's two ways to affect change. It's either you put your body on the line or your money where your mouth is. And I think that within the institutional sphere, that we have committed a large portion of our budget to collecting exactly the sort of collecting from the exact same sort of artists whom access is everything for, right? Representation matters. People want to see them reflected in, the work that we're collecting. Ultimately, too, that is redistributing a little bit of the wealth to the communities that are creating, and ultimately what keep institutions like ICA Miami open.
Wow, that's sick. You have a real answer to that question. That's amazing.
I admire the people I work with, and I think that we're taking strides in, like, we're almost like, I don't know, if anyone wants to copy that strategy, go for it.
No, I mean, committing 75% of your budget to collecting, POC and LGBTQ artists is absolutely putting your money where your mouth is, and also respect for just repping that on this thing tonight. Yeah. I know these are challenging things to talk about. Melissa, I wanted to double back, because I had suggested that I might ask a question earlier about George and Rosa, and I actually do just like, who are these people? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, the De La Cruz collection, I understand they run it. It's their stuff. It's their home. They open their door. It's free. But like, who are they? How did they get to this place? Like, what's the backstory? As much as you can share. I know that you can't just put these people on blast, but like.
No, I mean, Rosa and Carlos, they've been involved
Oh my God,
in
you said
the
Carlos?
local community for so long. There's so much,
Wait,
so
Melissa,
many
did you-
interviews that they've done, and they've talked a little bit about.
Well,
Did you lose me?
No, I'm sorry. Did you say Carlos?
Carlos.
I'm sorry. I thought I heard you say George earlier. My bad. I stand corrected.
No, that's okay.
Rosa and Carlos.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool.
Rosa and Carlos. Yeah. So, well, they are originally from Cuba. They left when Castro took over, and they lived in Spain for a while. They lived in New York. They made Miami their home in the 70s. They started collecting in probably the early 90s, I want to say. And they've been collecting ever since, but they've been deeply involved with art and culture for their entire lives. I mean, they got together when they were about 16, which is really sweet. So they've been together for over 50 years. But Rosa's grandfather, for example, was the first graduate of Duke. Was it Duke? In their architectural program. And he actually designed the Capitol building in Havana. At the collection on the 3rd floor, there's a portrait of Carlos de la Cruz's mother that was done by Salvador Dali. So they've always been really interested in art. And as a couple, they started collecting very early.
Interesting.
And contemporary art. They started out in Latin American art, and they took a pivot because they no longer wanted to just kind of silo their artists. So in about 2009, we opened the collection, but they had started just prior to that, they had a space called the Moore Space, because they felt as though they needed to start collecting the work that was happening now, that was being produced now. So
Interesting. Okay, that was gonna be my next question. If there was an emphasis placed on Latinx art. I absolutely heard what you just said, which was they pivoted because they didn't want to silo their artists. But is there like a pronounced thread of that work within the collection?
No, I would say that actually since the early 2000s, they've been focusing on a lot of American art. They also have a really great collection of German art, kind of the young wild, so Kippenberger, Albert Olin. Yeah, so they really focus on what is happening in the moment. They don't backtrack in their collection, and they typically buy in depth. So they'll follow an artist through their career.
But their relationship to Cuban American artists too goes pretty deep with Ana Mendieta.
Oh yeah, we have Ana Mendieta.
Felix Gonzalez Torres.
And Felix was a close friend of theirs, who actually is credited, at least when Rosa and Carlos talked to me about their history of collecting, that meeting Felix changed everything for them, because it totally took a shift on how they saw how art could be shared and just the possibility of art, because a lot of his work is very performative and very generous in nature.
Cool, interesting. Well, do y'all have like? Well, hold on. Let me regroup here. I mean, it's fascinating to talk to both of you at the same time, because you work at these institutions that in many ways share initiatives or a sense of mission, and in many ways are so different. Do you guys have like domestic art arguments?
You know,
I don't think so.
not really. We don't really fight ever. So we've been
Amazing.
together.
Holy smokes, man.
I think it's just one of those things where it's like, being in any sort of relationship requires that you have somewhat of almost like an uncanny understanding of the other individual and their idiosyncrasies, and I've got my fair share, and Melissa similar. I think if anything, there's a mutual admiration for like the place that we exist in the arts world or whatever, as being creatives ourselves. I mean, that we've got plenty to talk about, we could, and in the absence of fighting, talking always helps fill the,
That's amazing. Well, my wife and I could take a page out of your book. We definitely both believe that we understand the other person, and I think also both believe that the other person doesn't understand us, but but in reality, my wife has a masterful understanding of me. My line is she has a black belt in my bullshit. But but
I like that.
but and yeah, and there's a lot of that to go around. But so wait a minute. Like, speaking of the relationship, so I know, Andrew, you're behind propagating Look Alive Fest
Yep.
and 229.
Yeah.
And Melissa, I don't know exactly what your relationship is, but I know that there's some involvement because you've been present when Andrew has valiantly, heroically delivered PA systems to various sketchy locations where I've sought to, manifest some unwieldy cultural event.
Always happy to
I'm
help.
definitely Andrew's like roadie
Oh, for sure.
/ therapist / babysitter in all of those instances.
Yeah.
All of those things are required.
I require a good shoulder to cry on at the end of it all.
Yeah, well, tell us about Look Alive Fest. Because tell us about that.
For sure. So, okay. So this is the punk side of my practice, right? So, in one hand, I see how sort of like corporatism affords some artists the opportunity to be cultural producers, and Local Live Fest completely shits on all of that. So we don't accept corporate money. It's entirely funded by me. You know, it's entirely predicated on risk. And the truth is that we are sort of we're victim. We're not victim. We are. We live off the milk of human kindness when it comes to our cultural communities. We've made certain investments in ensuring that there's going to be artists, that there's going to be an interesting scene or whatever by participating or money or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's an effort to connect the international sort of like art scene at large with Miami's thriving cultural scene. So it's really sort of connecting the two, right? And hoping that this sort of dialogue extends beyond this sort of one-off experience that is Local Live Fest. So
And Andrew grew up in Miami, so a lot of this also comes from understanding the need and also loving experimental music. So this is a
Right.
curatorial practice for him in a way.
Right. And it's important to say it always takes place during Art Week.
That's right. That's right. And I think part of that is that, well, for one thing, there's a built-in audience for this sort of music. And I think it's also a great opportunity to sort of like, bridge these sort of connections, get these conversations started, connect people who are from out of town with artists on the ground, and be able to like show off another side of Miami that is largely absent from the glitz and glam and corporate aesthetic of like Art Basel.
And does it always take place at Churchill's?
It has. So in the first couple of years, we had a partnership with Gramps, so we were doing some events over there. But I think it's sort of since coalesced around Churchill's, because Churchill's has always been that sort of place that's just supportive of this, the unfettered need to create or express yourself in any way, right? So it's just been this. It's its own cultural institution of sorts, it's where people go to see the most adventurous, interesting, loud experiences in Miami and be able to connect with people who have an affinity for exactly that. So again, we have a location where these people congregate. We have an audience that comes in from out of town to have a very specific experience within the city, and we show them something different, and we connect people and get them talking.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And so, what, if any, is the connective tissue between this kind of street level art practice and the fine art world?
So that's a really good question.
That's for both of you. So Andrew, then Melissa, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So
I think many visual artists are also musicians and vice
yeah,
versa. So it's just something that organically happens.
yeah. I mean, it
There's an
happened.
immediacy of that performances allow you, that, and like an intimacy and a way to connect with other people who are interested in this sort of expression. So inevitably you're going to get visual artists that are also part of that scene and then
Yeah.
become part of the greater contemporary art scene.
Right, and that cross-pollination is exactly what we're going for, right? Um, so yeah, I mean, you summed it up pretty well. That's it. I mean, again, we foster these sort of creative spaces where, um, people working within the more sort of like codified art world can kind of take note of, right? We set the trends, we see this from a distance, we understand that like these people's practice are innovative or noteworthy in some sort of way that could feed into the larger sort of like arts ecosystem, the next step being institutional.
And Andrew and I have this conversation a lot about how often people can think about music and immediately think purely entertainment,
Yeah,
when there's such an underbelly of kind of conceptual work that's happening
yeah,
for a lot of these artists. And it's funny, it's with this whole situation of COVID and trying to reimagine what, we can't go to performances. What is that experience? Sound. I can't help but think of that Alvin Lucier piece, the I am sitting in a room.
mhm.
It's like we were all sitting in a room.
Hell yeah. No, yeah. Alvin Lucier has never been more relevant. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that also brings up another point about this idea of experience. So we're talking about, I know you mentioned something about like the value of art objects on a wall. I think one of the most challenging things at the institutional level is being able to convince funders that experience is as valuable, that these sort of like ephemeral experiences hold a certain cultural currency that they should be investing in. That's been one of my biggest challenges working within institutions for the longest time. It's convincing the people who keep the lights on that a musical performance, you know, outside of this sort of like Barbican sort of like set or whatever, because that's of its own, cultural relevancy, but like maybe supporting an emerging act might be, a gesture of putting one's faith in that artist as being somebody who is doing something innovative, right? And supporting them on their way to an institutional sort of performance. That's really difficult. It's really difficult to convince people with money that music, performance, and these sort of, something that people might perceive as scrappier or, at a much lower scale, either by production or artistic value, that these things matter, right?
And so Andrew thinks that matters, and so
Yeah,
look
No,
alive.
that's good. I mean,
right.
as
But it's
I
also
mean,
ushering that music into the
Institution.
institution that's proven a challenge,
I
right?
feel like I spent as a musician, I spent almost 20 years trying to figure out how you pierce the membrane of the art world. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And I had friends that were playing in museums and galleries and getting those invitations, but there's this it's really shrouded in mystery. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like in the last decade of that work on my part to try to be like, how do I somehow implicate myself in this? I was having success as a musician. I was touring Europe and playing festivals and putting out records and getting good reviews, and it just seemed like, to me, it just seemed like no road leads there from here. You know what I mean? And then
Mhm.
I ended up getting into it in a way that really surprised me. One way was through my work with the artist Tauba Auerbach, which was very, in a sense, very much by chance that even happened. She mentioned the band I play in an interview, and my label sent her records, and we became friends. But then the other way, and really the way that has produced the dominant amount of interface that I've had with the art world was through the first club that I ran, Trans Picos. We started to get tapped for curatorial programs in museums and galleries and art fairs and so on. And that kind of paved my way into that world. But it is, I mean, it's less true now, partially because of the emphasis being placed on performance by a lot of art institutions. But in the 90s and in the aughts, I really experienced, thinking about doing things in the context of the art world as this kind of like Rubik's Cube of culture. Like, how do you get there? It was a very, very mysterious proposition. I had a question for you, Melissa. Oh, man. Well, it'll come back to me. Oh, man, it's, when you have something and it's like right there.
Right there.
Yeah, that's endlessly frustrating. I think I
No,
drove
wait,
myself.
I remembered.
through
I
a
remembered.
week
Yes,
over
amazing.
a word.
I have had the experience a number of times working in the context of the art world as a music curator, where I developed this suspicion, with the exception of like specific individuals, like in the sense that there are specific individuals like you guys, like specific other people that I work with. The artist Peter Coffin is a great example. Tauba is a great example. But there's a lot, I would say dominantly, there's a lot of people who I suspect really kind of don't know what they think about music in the art world. Do you know what I mean? Like they're not that they don't know what they think about music in the art world, but just that they are people in the art world and they kind of don't really know what they think about music. They don't have a very refined opinion about it. Do you know what I mean? And like a time when this came up for me in a really like pronounced way was I had produced an after party for an art fair in New York who will go unnamed. And I had gone to great lengths to make sure that it was just a DJ lineup, but I made this DJ lineup was dialed in. And I had the previous night at my club at the time, Transpicos, I had these DJs in from Brazil who throw one of the really, really celebrated baile funk parties in Brazil called Arrastão. And they're totally incredible, and they're playing music that you really can't hear outside of Brazil, unless you're like really in some like deep cut Brazilian hang, And then the support DJs from New York were just very well selected, really on point. And we were in the basement of this bar in Manhattan, and it was just a very, very like incredible sonic environment, and therefore an incredible social environment. And it was really amazing. And I was down there from the time the after party started until pretty late at night, 1 in the morning. And then the art fair had taken over the whole bar, so the downstairs and the upstairs. And then I like go upstairs, which is still part of this art fair's party, and it's just Mark Ronson. You're just listening to Mark Ronson. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's like, and it's just like, and they're like into it. I mean, do you know what I'm saying? They're just like really like ecstatically, like transcendentally, like lifting off to Mark Ronson. And I was like, man, y'all really just don't have an opinion about music. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, now, I don't want to generalize. I'm not, look, there's plenty of people in the art world who have very, very evolved tastes in music. I'm absolutely aware of that. But I'm putting the question to you. Do you feel that in addition to the kind of conceptual hurdle of getting a museum administration to place value in performance, which is a sort of conceptual social economic challenge, but do you feel that part of that is a lack of literacy in the context of music in the art world in general? Like, is that an issue?
Yeah, I mean, do you mind? I'll take this one. So yeah, I'd agree that there is a little bit of a, I don't want to call it like an apathy or like but it might be an apathy. I think we're dealing with people who are of technocratic kind of like mindsets, right? Both at the curatorial and funder level, right? So you have the art curator who might, he refines his craft by sort of reading about art, reading about philosophy, reading about a bunch of different elements that might, inform his or her practice. But at the end of the day, what that might not extend to are some of these more sort of like ephemeral experiences,
Right.
music, or some scrappier performance-based stuff. But
Yeah, I think it's just a lot of it is experience.
Yeah.
You know, it's like with anything.
Time
I
too, an investment in those sort of musics.
Yeah. And also being exposed to the proper roadmap to maybe something that would ignite a curiosity or a preference for a particular type of music or a way to explore that type of music.
Yeah.
So again, there's access. I mean, there's plenty of scenes there in the music scene too that are impenetrable,
Right.
right?
Very
We've
true.
all
Very true.
at the elitism that can happen within the music world as well. So, I think that again, it comes down to a refinement that happens with access and curiosity and
Yeah.
experience. And
Yeah.
for everyone, that's going to be different. And for some people, they never explore it.
Right.
And they might explore something else like wine. I don't know.
But I think the
Why?
curiosity has to be there, though. Like the capacity to be able to think about it, intelligently, critically, has to be there in order to sort of like appreciate it and appreciate its significance within the larger art world.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm always fascinated to drill down on the minutia of the subject matter of the like subtle but important differences between mediums and how they get carried out in social and economic space. I mean, the flip side of that is that I think musicians all think that they have a really dialed in kind of like take on the visual art world, but if like there I think that there's this like perceived pressure on art institutions to have music programs because they have money and they have space. So it's like, okay, like where are the checks? Let's get a music program going. Do you know what I mean? Whereas like that's not like, that's like asymmetrical. It's not like, all right, man, like you've got a punk band, so like when are you gonna start buying art and like put on an art show? You know what I mean? It's like that doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So it's kind of unfair in that way. Okay, I have one final question for you guys, and then feel free to sound off.
Cool.
Go off, say whatever y'all want. But an interesting thing about all of this, like we're talking about Miami, we're talking about Art Week, we're talking about the communities of Miami and the communities that come to Miami and the institutions of Miami and eliminating access and not eliminating access, eliminating boundaries.
The barriers to access.
Okay, let's bring it.
We're breaking
bring it
down
back.
walls.
Yeah. But like a really important detail is that this is all happening in the context of the state of Florida, which has, Florida has a really unique reputation as far as states in the United States of America.
Florida man.
Yeah,
Go.
sure.
You know what I mean? Like Florida's wild. Like people.
Yeah.
I mean, like I'm not from Florida, so I'm like an outsider that probably has some like pretty base, kind of mass media informed sort of take on it. Other than that, I've been there a bunch of times and I've been to other places in Florida and stuff.
Yeah.
But like, people are like, okay, like Florida, alligators, bath salts. Like, people are just thinking about crazy, it's a wild place. Like, so like, what of that? Do you know what I mean? Like you guys are doing this thing that like, that really could pull weight in any cultural economy in America or in the world. You're like running these places, but you're doing it in this place that has a reputation for being kind of lawless, wild, kind of outsider-ish, you know what I mean? Just on its
Sure.
own trip. So does that come up for you? What about that? Just anything you have to say on that?
Well, a couple things. First of all, I mean, Miami, by virtue of being just like a major international hub, there's going to be like a confluence of, a bunch of different wild ideas. Plus, I mean, it's kind of like in New York in that there's a flavor for everybody here, right? I mean, we have access to so much stuff, but, it pales in comparison to a lot of international cities.
Well, we've got different stuff.
Yeah, that's just it. It's different. You know, the communities that we are engaging on a daily basis are different than in New York City. You know, we don't have the same sort of educational infrastructure for arts literacy either, you know, in the same way that other international cities have, specifically graduate programs. Um, so that being said, it's also really easy to sort of write off the rest of Florida as this kind of like monolithic, you know, Florida man constituency, but it's also with acknowledging that I mean, Florida is not without its incredibly interesting historical touch points, you know.
Well, and Miami in particular, it's
Yeah.
like what we do have is a lot of really interesting stories and a lot of different people
Yeah.
and music, and you know,
Yeah.
it's not till we start to kind of travel that we realize how great the food is,
Right.
and
Right.
you know, so for all its weirdness, it's yeah, we love Miami.
Yeah, I mean, it's a gateway to you know, the Latin diaspora and how, you know,
In the Caribbean.
right, in the Caribbean. There's so much going on. And in the rest of Florida, I mean,
And you might get a lizard thrown at you at a bar, you know, like that's also a thing that might
Right.
happen. You know?
yeah, or I get assaulted with a lizard by somebody else. No,
Well,
that kind of thing is strange, but like, it's the thing about Florida is that there's so much rich cultural happenings outside of like the Tri-County area that it's easy to sort of write off Florida as being Florida man. But the truth is that like Miami is in a very unique position to be able to foster a very singular sort of like facet of contemporary arts and cultural production, in that we, you know, again, incredibly diverse confluence of a million different ideas, a million different people willing to throw money at like, you know, wild things. We have a lot of support by cultural institutions that are willing to fund adventurous ideas. I think what's different from us and the rest of Florida is that we have exactly that. We have the infrastructure for both learning and being able to redistribute wealth to cultural producers. And that oftentimes tends to be what keeps artists in other cities, be it Florida or the rest of the country, from being able to do what they do unencumbered by like, you know, the stress of life.
right, right. That's amazing. I had this amazing experience. I mean, I've had a host of amazing experiences, and I could do like a monologue on the weird shit I've done in Miami. I had this really like having really nothing to do with Art Week per se when I was down there working with ICA, and my wife and daughter and her friend stayed at that spot. It's like a
Vagabond?
it's
Oh
like
yeah, you stayed at Vagabond.
yeah,
Yeah, and
the
Roberto
Vagabond.
Goldberg, yeah.
And the restaurant at the Vagabond, like it kind of has the character of what a place like Ace Hotel or something has in New York. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was great. Had a great time. Cocktails were amazing, and food was great. You know, but there was this really interesting way in which it differed from New York, which I really admired and thought was cool. Which was that they had, you know, at Ace Hotel, just for example, since we're talking about it, and I know this firsthand because I used to DJ at Ace Hotel, they have a pretty heavily curated DJ program at Ace Hotel. So the music in the lobby of Ace Hotel is very deliberate. The last I checked, my friend Ben Sisto was doing it for a long time, and now I think it's JD from La Tigre that curates the DJ lineups at Ace Hotel. And you know, they're just like DJs from the scene, but it's like pretty dialed in. You know what I mean? And like everybody's there feeling cool and relevant and whatever. And at the Vagabond, they had a live band, you know, and they were doing like covers and shit. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
and like we hung, and at first everybody was there, and the live band was playing, you know, kind of appropriately. But then as people started to clear out, it was like the people who had come for the live band remained, and it was a cover band. You know what I mean? Which is like,
But that's when the party really started.
Oh, for sure.
And you just, I mean, that would just never happen in New York, man. Like,
Yeah.
to go see a cover band unironically presented in New York, you'd have to go to like Deep Queens somewhere where it's like people are like fans of a cover band. Do you know what I mean? It's just like not a thing. And like they were playing like the part the part that I remember where I had this kind of moment of being like, this is incredible, is they were playing No Woman, No Cry, like cover band doing Bob Marley. And like there were maybe like 20 people that were just clearly there to see this cover band. And it was just like fully like lighters out, like you were at like a stadium concert. And it was completely unironic, and it was so uncynical and like joyous and just like earnest. And I was like, man, we don't like, I was saying to my wife, I was like, no one we know does this. This is just like, it's like we're always at something, like being there and being seen there and like evaluating it and sort of deciding about whether or not we think it's like appropriately relevant. And it's like this very like cerebral, like ultimately very cynical and really kind of nihilistic cultural social space to just exist within all the time. And being at this place that was like really well appointed and nice, and not in any way sequestered in some, you know, kind of hinterland neighborhood or something, where this like really kind of tried and true classic American kind of cover band situation could take place and people could have this like unbridled, joyous, totally uncynical experience, was really moving and really deep for me. And it's just not something that would happen in New York.
Well, and I'm so glad you say that, because I grew up in New Jersey. So, you know, I used to spend some time in Philly before moving to Miami. I've been in Miami now for like maybe 14 years. But I remember when I first started going out in Miami, realizing that when you went out to the club, people danced. Like,
Right.
like it was a joyous occasion. Like you got down and like you enjoyed yourself. And that, you know, you got to love that.
Yeah. And honestly, that sort of that unpretentious joy of being like in the moment and like just, you know, unironically going to see a cover band play at a like what rehabbed 50s Miami like, you know, some place that's been
Motel.
frozen in time, some anachronistic like hotel off the Biscayne corridor. It's just like, oh yeah, where else would this happen?
Yeah, that's a very special like little area too, because all of those motels are, I guess that the facades are protected. They're historically protected, so they all look like they were just frozen in time, 50s.
Right.
But
that's amazing. Well, guys,
but that is the ultimate Art Week experience that you had.
Yeah. I mean, joyous and unpretentious Miami. I mean, I think this is a good jumping off point. It's been amazing having you guys on the show. Thank you for coming on. Andrew McLeese, Miami ICA, Look Alive Fest 229, which we did not talk about next time, and Melissa Wallen, De La Cruz Collection. I'm going to do this little outro thing, hang if you want. But guys, thank you so much. This has been hyper deep. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks for having us, Sam.
Yeah, of course. All right. You heard it here, Place of Assembly. That was amazing and really interesting to talk about. Generally, doing this show has been really an incredible opportunity to go deep with people on subject matters that I don't really get to expound upon very much because life is hectic. And I am gradually pulling up my outro music here, which I forgot to preload. But thanks everybody who's been watching this show. It's been sick. This is Place of Assembly, produced by Hollow in partnership with Experimental Sound Studio Chicago and 8 Ball Radio. Support us on Patreon or make a one-time donation on Venmo. The handle is at the bottom left corner of the screen. And next week we have Hybrida Collective from Udine, Italy. Anarchist, out music, punk, psychedelic, deep bunch of characters. I got to hang with them in February. They're going to be on here telling us about what they're dealing with. And until then, stay safe and see you next time. All right.
Tell me what to do, what to do. Tell me what to do. I can't see, yeah, what to look. Tell me what to look. I cannot see now. Yeah, smoke, 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 smoke. All the smoke all around me looks like smoke. Yeah, can't you see? Yeah. Everywhere, all around me, his body's pissing. It's a bit like me, it's a bit like you, don't you feel? Yeah, it's a fucking little animals. Looking at the wild silent puppy, understanding all, talking enough all that. Yeah, must be something there. Yeah. Doing something, walking, searching something that I see, looking somewhere, while being buying stuff that. Tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. I cannot see what to look. What to look. I cannot see. I smoke. All around me. Looks like smoke, yo. Yeah.